In this video, I'm going to talk about everything that you must know about pod in Kubernetes, primarily focused for the certification CKA, CKAD, but also if you're learning pod in general, this is the first and the smallest unit that you must know and important. We'll also create some of the pods, how to play, how to see, everything with a hands-on driven as well. And it's part of our 21 days series on getting certified on Kubernetes CK or CKAD. So with that, let's look at what we are going to look in depth in this day 2 of a 21 day series about pods, and we'll also include something about YAML, yet another markup language. So we'll look at first of all what this pod is, including the characteristics and properties of a pod. We'll also talk about YAML, which is yet another markup language which will be used to create these pods, not just pods, but other components that we create or other objects that we create within Kubernetes. That will be very, very handy. We'll also briefly touch base with JSON. JSON is not required literally for the exam, but it's good to or nice to know or aware about JSON as well. We'll also look at why it's important for you to do, not just for CK and CKD, but anything you do in Kubernetes, everything will be revolved our pod. Also, some of the common commands, and I've already installed a Kubernetes cluster. I've done it on Minikube. And if you're not familiar, if you've not managed to create Kubernetes cluster on the first part of my series, then I'll give you a separate video about install Minikube so you can practice on your laptop this Kubernetes cluster and these characteristics as well. We'll check some of the things that you do in day-to-day basis for the pod. We'll do actually hands-on. And then finally, we are going to give you some tips about certification, what questions you can expect in CK, CKD certification as well. So that's all we're going to cover in this. And if you want to work with us on getting certified and as well as getting a high-paying job, then we'll talk about that as well towards end. And if you're wondering, if you're coming here first time, my name is Atul. I've been in IT for more than 2.5 decades now. And last 1.5 decade has been cloud, DevOps, containers, Kubernetes, and nowadays machine learning, AI, and lot of things as well. So this is a part of 21 days series. If you're not yet registered, you can register by going to this URL. Just click on this. You will go and enter your name and email address and a phone number so that you get notified every time when a new video comes, or if you need our help on this one as well. So with that, let's look at what is pod actually means. The pod is the smallest unit on which you within the context of Kubernetes, on which you deploy your application. Now it's a collection of one or more containers, and containers is nothing but, as I said, where your web services or a small application runs. So take an example, you have built an Uber application, you might have seen. In that Uber application, you might have different components, like you have passenger selection, you might have where you build your profile, where you do the billing, where you do the UI, different parts, and where you go and rate a driver. Similarly, there is on the passenger side as well, drivers rate passengers and so on. So all these small services are built as a web service, and these web services run on top of a containers, and collection of one or more containers is a pod on which your application running. So as you see in the diagram, you have a container one, and then pod 1 has one container, pod 2 has two containers, container 1 and container 2. And this is we also called as multi-container pod that you will see. So this is a node is a machine on which is we saw earlier on day 1, there's a worker node or data plane. So on worker node, you have one or more pods, and within each pod you have one or more containers. Nginx is a front-end application, or kind of think of it as a load balancer that's running as a pod here. This is just an example of that you see as well. So we are doing it for example for the explanation of certification, as I said earlier. Now pods are designed to run closely. All the processes within the pod are designed to run together. Also, all the containers within pod share the same network as well as storage, and all the specifications are bundled into one thing. It's the smallest deployable unit, as I said, in the Kubernetes. Now, some of the characteristics of pod: you have a single IP. Also, all pods share the same IP. All containers. So if you have container 1 and container 2, both will share the same IP address in the pod, and this is how your pod can talk to each other. Pod 1 will have its IP, and pod 2 will have its own IP as well. But containers within the pod will share the same IP as well. Now, there's also within a pod, you might have multiple containers. The containers will share the same storage within the pod itself as well. And the containers within the pod, if it's a multi-container pod, they will share the same communicate using the local host within this as well. So this container wants to talk to this container within pod, they will talk to using local host. But this container wants to, sorry, this pod wants to talk to this pod, they'll be connecting using their own IPs as well. Now, most of the time you'll be running a single container, so one application, one container, but some scenarios you might run a multi-container pod, and that's called there are different patterns. And if you go on 21-day series, which I mentioned, we are going to do later, I think on later days, we are going to look at day 21 or day 22. We are going to look at multi-container pod. Yeah, day 15, we are going to look at multi-container pod, where we look at the different patterns like sidecar, ambassador, adapters, and init as well. So if you want to go read more, there's a documentation we have written pointing to our blog, which talks about multi-container pod. You can click here as well. So side container, so there are different patterns. Sidecar pattern is much common that you see here. Also read more about pod, which is given here, or containers. You can click on these links as well. And you might be wondering, how do you come to this page? If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, you come to k2academy.com/free community. This community is absolutely free. If you're already part of this, fine, skip this part, but you come into the classroom here that you see under, this is a free, absolutely free community. Come to the classroom here. And then the classroom, if you scroll down, under the certifications, you will see a certification for CKA, CKD. This is where I'm recording for day 2, and you can watch the day 1 as well if you missed the day 1 on from here. So, so this is use cases. So this is about sidecar, which is sidecar. It is typically to help the primary car, as you might have seen on someone on the old style scooters you have driving. So the sidecar pattern, and again we are going to go deeper, and I'm not going to go here right now, but later on day 15 we'll be going deeper as well. But just to get you, let you know, there is a containers, sidecar containers as well, a pattern as a pattern. Now you have YAML, which is yet another markup language, which is a way to create any artifacts that you see. This is an example of YAML, which is a particular human readable format. I'll explain you as we do. So this is the format which is written in YAML, which is yet another markup language. It's a human readable file which is used camel. So this YAML is being used to create or describe objects like pods, deployment services. What are the pods? What are the deployment and services? We are going to look at in future videos as you, or in future series that you come across as well. Now, each Kubernetes object has artifacts like this. So in this particular case, it has an API version. We are doing API application programming interface version V1. It's of kind pod. It could be kind deployment. It could be kind services. And as we saw, as we go forward, you will have more and more things, more and more different kinds. In this case, we are doing pod. Now it has a metadata, which is a describe or properties of that particular object, in this case pod. It has a name of the pod is now my simple pod, and we're going to create this pod, and then you will see how does the pod look like. It has a label again we're going to do in future. I think it's going to come on day 3 or day 4. Label is a very important concept that you should be doing. Yeah, so this is next, label and namespace. We're going to look at the next on day 3, this label and namespace. I'll go that a little bit later, just keep it hold for now. There's something label, and then this is a spec which has a container. This is name of the container is Nginx container, and it's coming. Each of that pod that comes will have one or more containers, as I said, and containers will be created from an image that has all the data that you need, everything that you need, kind of a, think of it as like operating system image, not actually operating system. So this is coming from an Nginx image, and it is running on a port number 80. So the container listening on that pod will be listening on a port number 80. That's all it is about. Now, similar to you have YAML, similar to that you have another thing called JSON, which is JavaScript object notation. Another way to represent, it's a key value pair. If you notice here, this is another way to represent, and you can use that as well for your Kubernetes objects, but that's not very common. Much more common is YAML, and that's how you will be in exam point of view. Also, a YAML is more than enough. It's just for representation, also just from a knowledge point of view. JSON is another method for Kubernetes object creation, and it's but YAML is much more readable. If we have seen that as well, it becomes a little bit more complex formatting as well. Internally, Kubernetes, they talk to each other objects using JSON, but YAML from exam point of view, YAML is much more enough. You can read out more. It'll explain in this format as well. So as I said, Kubernetes from a certification point of view, YAML is more than enough. Usually I've not come across a lot of guys who are using JSON. It's mainly JSON primarily for Kubernetes point of view. Otherwise, JSON is quite common used in day-to-day operations for other things, but not for this. Now, from an exam point of view, both CKA and CKAD, there's another certification which I covered on day 0 about these certifications. But from a CKA focus point of view, the more questions are going to be like managing pods, troubleshooting pods, using commands like kubectl. You should be very, very familiar with kubectl. Now, as a separate video when I was doing when you install 3-node Kubernetes cluster, I think I've covered in day 2. Let me go back onto day 2. We say, or maybe I'll explain you, day 1. So if I go back on day 1, there's a step-by-step 3-node Kubernetes cluster we shared how to install Kubernetes cluster. In that, we cover install kubectl. Let me see where that is. Yeah, how to set up a 3-node Kubernetes cluster. Go there and refer. Or if you want a simpler version of that, it's too complex, leave me a comment below this video and we'll install a Minikube, which is another version. It should already be, if not, I'll add that Minikube as well. That's quite simple. This is what I'm using here on Minikube, because starting a 3-node Kubernetes cluster, to be frank, it's pain and it takes a lot of resources and everything, but I can do everything on my laptop, which is quite and simple. So you do kubectl and then describing the pod, looking at the logging, troubleshooting, and finding out more details. This is more about it from an administration point of view. Also, you can apply the configurations, add it, modify all those things using from an administrator point of view. From a developer point of view, how do you write these YAMLs? How do you create applications? How to deploy applications? Also, so there are some advanced pod features which are going to cover in as we move forward on remaining future days. That's when we're going to cover more on these advanced Kubernetes concept that you talk about. Things like how do you mount a volume, which is a storage volume? How do you do multi-container pod? All those things we are going to cover in future on as well. Now, with that, let's look at some of the common commands that you are going to do. So what I've done is I've copy pasted. You can just simply copy paste and put it into Notepad like this. So if you go and create a Notepad, but make sure that you save it as in a YAML format, YAML. I'll explain you as well. So you save it like this and file, and then do a save as on your laptop or wherever you do, and you do my app or whatever my pod dot YAML, and then put it in double quotes, otherwise it will be saving as a text format, and click on save and it'll go and save. I've already saved it. I've already saved is my pod dash simple, which is also you see here. Let me open it in a Notepad, which I think I've already opened as a Notepad. This is pod simple. This is what it is, file. So this is one which we are going to create, v1 pod. This is just exactly what I showed you here, which I've saved it under C users Atul download folder, create scripts, pod simple. And this is what we are saying, as I said earlier, we're creating an AP pod, which is a simple pod name label. Not now, but in future, we're going to use this label. So, and then this is an Nginx pod with the image of Nginx. That's what we're creating on here. So in order for me, first I'm going to say, as I said earlier, so kubectl is the command. So we'll say kubectl and then get nodes. This is a command. And if you need any help, you say get dash dash or kubectl dash dash and help. And it'll give you all the help that you need. I've already installed kubectl. I've already installed whatever you see is a Minikube, and I've opened as a PowerShell. On that, I'm running this command. And you see all the commands related to kubectl, which I'll be here, create, expose, all these things, basic commands, run, and so on. I'm not going to go here. I'm going to say, for example, get command, and it'll give me all the help related to the get command that you see, that you come all these things here. Similarly, I want to know how many nodes are there. Because it's a Minikube, there'll be only one single node, which is name is Minikube. It's control plane. It started 34 hours ago, and so on. Then I'll say get pods. So it will tell me how many pods are there. There is no pod here on this machine that you see currently in a default namespace. Now, what is a namespace? We covered on day 1, logical partitioning of a cluster. And so if you say namespace, which I think we're going to come on day 3. After this, we're going to cover namespace. So right now, in this default namespace, there is a system namespace that comes by default for system related resources. We are not talking about that. Again, we'll cover that later. So now for me to create a pod, I simply already have a file in this location, which I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to say kubectl apply -f forcefully. So I'm going to say now kubectl apply, and then the file name. So let me go up on which I've already executed once. So force is a parameter. I don't want to do a force, and just let's see what happened. So what I'm saying here is I'm saying kubectl apply this, whatever in this YAML file, just hit and apply. So it's going to go and saying there is so unexpected arguments. There is no. It's expecting a file which is a missing. So f is, sorry, it was not force, it was a file minus f. This is the file that it needs to be applied. Now it's going to go and apply and saying Kubernetes got pod up created. That's how it is. And now it says get pod. It's doing 0. It's not yet ready. It's saying name of the pod which we saw in this command, which was pod simple. Name of the command, name of my simple pod that you see here, which is a metadata name. And right now it's not ready. Its status is status is starting. Oh, sorry, the starting. Container is creating and restart. It's 0 time restarted and it started 6 seconds back. Now I can output is this. Now I've already got the pods, and then I want to know a little bit more about this pod. So I'll say instead of pod this, I'll say describe, and then what I want to describe is, you can fast forward if you're not want to insert and you want to jump onto, you can simply jump on other part as well. Describe, and then I want to describe pod, and then pod name, whatever is pod name, which is here my dash simple dash pod, and hit enter. Now it will tell you what exactly it's doing. Everything about this pod, it's saying name is this. This is under the default namespace. You can create in a different namespaces as well. Now priority will come in later. It's deployed on this node, which is a machine, which is a worker node, and started on, I'm recording this 9th of January. And label is app demo. There's no annotations. There's another thing, annotation, which we'll talk in future. Status is running. As it's talking about, each pod has an IP address. So it got this IP address, and it's running this container, which name of the container is Nginx. Under this container ID, it's running inside a Docker container, and image is this image tag ID, which we'll be talking about later. And this listening on port number 80, all those things which is there, and so on. There are more additional things you can look. If I go back and say get pods, now again it's running. Earlier it was 01, it's now running. So that's pretty much about, I've got the details. Now in the exam, you can ask for troubleshooting purpose, and we're going to look, I think there's a dedicated module about troubleshooting. Later, I think there'll be some questions about troubleshooting as well. So I think it's day 12, 13, will come that on troubleshooting point. So make sure you're familiar with that. If I see my log as well, I can run some more commands here, and say log my simple. It will tell me log everything. So especially a handful for troubleshooting. If something is not working, you can give the name of the pod. So logs of this pod as well. Also, if there are multiple containers in the pod, in this case it's not. You can specify the container within a pod. If you need to see what container specific troubleshooting, you can look at that as well. How do you delete the pod? Again, we'll simply say go here and say delete, and then pod, and then whatever is the name of the pod which we saw, my dash simple dash pod, it'll go and delete the pod as well. And then we'll say get pod again. It'll be, now if I go and see get pods, you have no resources found, the pod is gone now. I can restart, I can create, and so on. I can even, when we go for deployment, we'll see that multiple deployments, within one command, you can say create 5 copies of this pod. Or if you have a multi-container pod, later when we go for tenting and more advanced features, you can say create 2 pod in this particular machine, but don't create all on the same machine, and so on. There's a lot of advanced things you can do and talk about. Then there are other things you can do with this. You can create pod, you can check the status, you can view details, logs, delete, and so on. These are some of the basic things as well. Now, from a certification point of view, we're going to go more advanced in future. We are going to use the same YAML to write my deployment services, config map, more advanced things that you see. Also make sure, as I said, from a certification point of view, understand these concepts like debugging, troubleshooting. We're going to look all those things as we move forward. This is day 2. I want to keep it simple and to the point on this one as well. Now, there are some more advanced certification focused questions that can come. I'm going to cover here also. With that, let's look at and see and test ourselves and see whether we are able to understand so far. Again, if you don't understand, don't worry. Watch this video one more time, but see without looking at the answer, what could be the answer here? What is the smallest deployable unit in Kubernetes? I think you probably know it. I said the first thing, it's pod. B answer is B pod. Now, what are the purpose of YAML in Kubernetes? I think probably again you also know about this, to store whatever. I think its answer number is, don't look at the answers first, you see or and see if you can answer B. Absolutely. Next is, how do you check if pod is running? This is a good one. Get pod, describe pod, list pod, or check pods. I think you'll be going get pod. We've used extensively in get pods. Now, next one is YAML. What does key value pair represents? It's basically, it's not a condition. It's not a, it's a mapping of a property and its value. Of course, mapping of a property and its value. And then we go for proper. Oh, this is important. What is the proper indentation? Indentation is very, very important. If you do one comma here or there or one space here and there, it might break. So B, it needs to be in a particular format only. So there is no tabs. It's like two spaces here and two spaces here. There'll be dash and then one space. This is the only thing which I think is painful in my view. It needs to be a particular indentation, which is, but otherwise it's basically very, very simple. So it's spaces, two or more, but no tabs allowed. So it's important. Now, some of the exam questions you can expect is, hey, in exam, they might ask you and say, hey, create a pod with this name and with a single container with this image, they give you image name, or export a pod in YAML. This, read out this. I'm going to share on maybe this particular, come to this post and do, or maybe below this video, there should be some link which should have all these. So these are some basic questions, but then also some troubleshooting instructions and say, hey, pod name this is stuck in a pending state, investigate why and fix the issue if possible. And this is where some of the troubleshooting commands where we saw, you need to probably understand it clear. We're saying Kubernetes describe, and then we'll inspect what happened as well. There are some common issues you might come across. Later when we say troubleshooting, there's a day for troubleshooting. That's when we'll do cover. Another question might be, hey, you have a pod which is keep crashing or keep restarting. What, troubleshoot it and tell what might be the problem as well. Again, you're going to look at the log files. These are a little bit more advanced. When we come troubleshooting, we're going to look at as well. Now, again, I've posted some of the advanced things. You don't need to do it right now. When we go for future dates or future days, that's when we're going to look at multi-container pods. They might ask and say, create a pod with two containers in this case. So here, how to create two containers. Within that, you have containers and then container 1 and container 2. So there's a name container Nginx with this image, and then another container with this image called a name called sidecar with the image busybox, and so on. Then there should be some developer focused questions might come and say, create a pod with container this image, and they might be asking you to environment variable. This is where you don't hardcore, you use environment variables on that. So in that you will have an environment within YAML, you have an env, and this is more on now from a development point of view. Also, there's a volume. Again, this is, I'm not going to do this right now. Later we have two volume or storage volumes. I think on one of the days we have storage, persistent volumes. That's when we're going to cover. Let me see where these are. Yeah, so we have within storage, you have different three type of storage. I think ephemeral storage, which is a temporary storage on day 8, and day 9 we are going to go on a persistent permanent store, also including NFS and dynamic mount and so on, dynamically mounting that as the demand increases. So that's when we're going to look at some of these exam questions. Also, there is a liveliness and readiness probing. Again, that's we're going to cover in future days on liveliness and probing. Health checks, liveliness and probing. This is where day 14 we're going to cover these more advanced things as well. Now, there could be also questions related to both CK and CKAD. Examples like, hey, export a YAML on a running pod, or dry run mode. There is a separate mode where you're not actually executing the pod, you're testing this pod and see, you want to see the output, how does it look like, and you just want a YAML output. You don't want to actually execute on, so you can dump the YAML file of a running pod or the pod that is available. Also, there is a labels and selector. Again, we don't need to do it. This is future proofing you that this is something which you can expect in when we come for labels and selectors. That's when we're going to cover that as well. Now, that's pretty much, make sure that you do extensive hands-on lab, make yourself comfortable from the certification point of view. And if you need our help, we have a job and certification accelerator program where we help you in getting certified. Not only getting certified, which is easy in my view, the more difficult helping you in getting a job, which is about whether it's a DevOps, containers, Kubernetes, cloud, multi-cloud, all those things we cover. We do 3 tracks. We do more about is AI, machine learning, where we deploy some of these AI machine learning deploy on containers and Kubernetes, data related, cloud related, anything and everything related to cloud, AWS, Azure, Google, or data engineering, data analyst, data architect, as well as AI machine learning. We help you with both preparing a step-by-step hands-on lab, resume and LinkedIn, as well as mock interviews, everything inside that. Fill this form. Yeah, so the URL is k2academy.com/book call. Fill this form and let my team know if you have any questions. They will walk you through and help you further with all your questions as well. And if you need any help with the pod or any commands, anything, just come under this section and leave a comment. So either me or my team will help you. Apart from that, if you need any other help, just leave a below any questions below this video. Anything, even if it's not related to pods, anything else related to, do let me know. And also don't forget to subscribe to this channel or this community or this channel, and register for this free 21 days series, which we're learning and talking about everything about containers and Kubernetes on certification CKA and CKAD. With that, I'm going to see you soon on day 3 of this 21 days bootcamp about containers and Kubernetes. Take care and bye for now.